Don't be dramatic, Mum. It's just a generic painkiller. The doctor said it's perfectly fine for your arthritis. My son, Mark, stood in my kitchen and pushed the plastic bottle across the granite countertop. It made a cheap, rattling sound. The morning sun streamed through the window over the sink, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. The pain in my hip wasn't generic. It was a deep, grinding ache that kept me awake at night, a constant reminder that something was very wrong. Mark just saw an expense to be managed. He smiled, but his eyes were already on his phone, checking his emails. I picked up the bottle, the white plastic cool against my fingers. The hum of my old refrigerator filled the silence. I unscrewed the cap and shook one of the big, chalky pills into my palm. He saw me as a problem, a line item on a budget sheet. He didn't see the woman who'd paid for his college education with her secretarial salary. "Thanks, honey," I said, my voice sounding thinner than I wanted. He nodded, not looking up. I swallowed the pill with a sip of lukewarm coffee and wondered if this was it. Was this how the rest of my years would be? Managed, minimized, and medicated with the cheapest thing on the shelf. A few days later, my daughter Susan came over. She breezed in, smelling of expensive perfume and purpose. "Just here to help you get organized, Mum," she announced, heading straight for my pantry. I heard the rustle of bags and the clank of cans. I sat at my kitchen table, clutching my mug, while she conducted her raid. "Honestly, this canned corn expired in March. You could get sick," she said, her voice echoing from inside the small closet. A can of my favorite creamed corn hit the bottom of the trash bag with a dull thud. Then another. "And these HOA fees are going up again. Mark and I were talking. It's just robbery what they charge you to live here." She emerged, holding a box of crackers. "And the property taxes." She talked about my house as if I didn't live in it. She spoke about my money as if it were already hers. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a collection of bills and expiration dates. I looked at her, so full of energy and concern, and saw a stranger. "I'm managing just fine, Susan," I said softly. She patted my shoulder. "Of course you are. We just want to make it easier for you." Easier for me or easier for them? The question hung in the air, but I didn't dare ask it. Susan insisted on taking me to my next doctor's appointment. The room smelled of antiseptic and old paper files. I sat on the edge of the exam table, the thin paper crinkling under me. My hip ached from the low chair in the waiting room. When the doctor came in, Susan did all the talking. "She's doing so much better with the new pain medication," Susan told him, her voice bright and confident. "It's really manageable now, isn't it, Mom?" She glanced at me, a warning in her eyes. I wanted to tell him about the nights I spent wide awake, about the searing pain when I tried to work in my garden. But the words caught in my throat. I just nodded. The doctor was busy, his eyes on his computer screen. He typed a few notes. "Good. Good. We'll just continue with that then. See you in 3 months." He smiled a quick, professional smile and was gone. As we walked out, I glanced back. For just a second, I saw the doctor looking at me. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked like pity. Then he turned away, and the moment was gone. That evening, I was walking down the hall to my bedroom when I heard Mark's voice. He was in the guest room on his phone, the door slightly ajar. His voice was low and urgent. I stopped, my hand on the cool, painted wall. "I know what the other guy said," Mark muttered. "No, we can't afford that specialist. It's thousands, just for a consultation." There was a pause. I held my breath, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room suddenly deafening. "Look," he said. his voice dropping even lower. The house is the main asset. We have to be smart about this. Asset. The word hit me like a stone. Not my home. Not the place I raised my children and mourned my husband. An asset. A number on a ledger. I crept away before he could see me and got into my bed. I pulled the old quilt my mother had made right up to my chin, but I couldn't stop shivering. Mark came over the next Saturday with a stack of papers and a pen. The television was murmuring a game show in the living room. He spread the documents on the dining room table, right over the lace runner my husband, Bill, had bought me. "Mum, we need to simplify your finances," he said, his tone full of false patience. "This is a durable power of attorney. It just means Susan and I can help you pay bills and manage things if you ever get sick. It's just in case." He slid a form in front of me and pointed to a line at the bottom. "Sign here." I looked at his face, so earnest and convincing. He was my son. I was supposed to trust him. The memory of him calling my home an asset was sharp, but I pushed it down. Arguing seemed so tiring. I felt foolish and weak, but I picked up the pen. The ink smelled sharp and final. I signed my name. He immediately gathered the papers, a quick smile of relief on his face. As he left, I felt a deep, hollow ache that had nothing to do with my hip. I had just given something away, and I was terrified I would never get it back. My friend Carol from church came over for tea that Tuesday. The smell of her Earl Grey always reminded me of happier times. I set out my good china, the little cups with the tiny blue flowers my late husband, Tom, had bought me for our anniversary one year. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked a steady, comforting rhythm. Carol was telling me about her sister's health scare. "It was a real mess, Eleanor. Doctors saying one thing, specialists saying another. She was overwhelmed." I nodded, pouring more tea. I knew the feeling. "Then she hired something called a patient advocate," Carol said, taking a small bite of a biscuit. "A woman who knew the system. She sorted everything out, got my sister the right appointments, the right treatment. Best money she ever spent." The words, patient advocate, just hung there in the air between us. I had never heard of such a thing. Carol put her cup down and glanced at the little orange bottle of pills on my side table. "Is this really what the doctor recommended for that hip of yours?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "It looks like the cheap stuff they give you for a headache." A few days later, I was in my garden, trying to pull up a stubborn weed near my rose bushes. The sun felt good on my back, and the smell of the damp earth was rich and sweet. I gave one last tug, and a sharp, blinding pain shot through my hip. My leg just gave out. I went down hard on the grass. I lay there for a minute, catching my breath, the world spinning. Finally, I managed to crawl back inside and pull myself onto the couch. I knew I couldn't just ignore it. My hands were shaking as I dialed my daughter, Susan. She picked up on the third ring. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I had a little fall in the garden," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My hip. It's really bad." There was a long sigh on the other end of the line. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of my problem becoming her problem. "I hope you didn't break anything," she said, her voice tight with annoyance. "The Medicare copays are outrageous this year." That night, sleep was impossible. The pain was a hot, throbbing thing that wouldn't let me be. Every time I shifted, a fresh wave washed over me. The house was so quiet, just the hum of the old air conditioner in the window. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up. I reached for my tablet on the nightstand. The blue light felt harsh in the dark room. My fingers felt clumsy on the screen. I typed in the words Carol had said. PATIENTADVOCATE. A local service popped up. I started reading the testimonials. One was from a woman named Doris, age 81. They found what 3 other doctors missed, she wrote. Another was from a man whose wife had been misdiagnosed. They saved her life. My heart started to beat a little faster. I saw a button that said, "Free consultation." My finger trembled as I moved it over the screen. I didn't click it. Not yet. But I bookmarked the page. The next afternoon, Mark called. His voice was cheerful, the way it always was when he was managing something. "Hey, Mum. Just wanted to let you know I got you in with Dr. Miller for next Thursday at 10. He'd scheduled it, without asking me, like I was a child. A small, unfamiliar spark of anger flickered inside me. "Thank you, Mark," I said, my voice quieter than I wanted. "But I'll schedule it myself this time." The silence on the other end of the phone was long and cold. I could picture his face, the pleasant mask dropping away to show the irritation underneath. "Fine," he finally said, clipping the word short. "But Susan will still be there with you." After I hung up, I went into my bedroom and picked up the silver-framed photo of Tom from my dresser. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He always used to say, "Eleanor, you're tougher than you think you are." I ran my thumb over the cool glass. He was right. It was time I started believing it. I sat on the edge of my bed, the heavy old rotary phone in my lap. The floral pattern on my quilt felt soft under my hands. I made 2 calls. The first was to the patient advocate's office. I scheduled a consultation for the following afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. The second call was to my bank. I asked them to mail me copies of all my financial statements for the past year. I told them to send it to my friend Carol's house. I met the patient advocate at a little coffee shop downtown. The air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. Her name was Sarah, and she had kind eyes that didn't look away when I spoke. The ceramic mug felt warm and heavy in my hands. "They're good children," I started, feeling the need to defend them. "They just worry about money." Sarah just nodded. She didn't judge. She just listened while I told her about the cheap painkillers and the way Susan steered the doctor's appointments. I told her about Mark's phone call, about being an asset. The word felt like a splinter in my tongue. "Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "Let's start with one thing. Let's get your full medical records. It's your legal right." For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear. It felt like a plan. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator. I slipped out of bed and went to the hall closet. The air inside smelled of mothballs and old wool coats. I pulled down the old floral hat box from the top shelf. It was my mother's. Inside, I began to build my secret file. The deed to the house. My original will. The one my late husband and I had written together. The statements from my pension. The bank records I had requested. The papers felt thin and important in my hands. I placed them all neatly inside the hat box and pushed it back into the darkness of the closet, behind a stack of old blankets. The secrecy felt wrong, like I was a thief in my own home. But it also felt like I was finally taking back something that belonged to me. The large manila envelope arrived a week later. It felt heavy with dread. I called Sarah, and she came over that afternoon. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Mark had handed me that bottle of cheap pills. The sunlight streamed in, lighting up the dust motes in the air. Sarah opened the file. She read through the pages, her expression calm and professional. Then she turned a page toward me and pointed to a paragraph. "Here it is, Eleanor." The words were big and ugly. Severe degenerative osteoporosis, not arthritis. The recommended treatment was an infusion therapy. Expensive, the report noted. Then Sarah pointed to a smaller note at the bottom of the page. It was a record of a phone call. My son, Mark, using his power of attorney, had spoken to the doctor's office. He had declined the recommended treatment on my behalf. The reason was typed in cold black letters. Cost concerns. Sarah recommended an elder law attorney named Mr. Davies. His office was in an old brick building downtown. It smelled of lemon polish and old books. I sat in a heavy leather chair that made me feel small. Mr. Davies was a kind man with white hair and a gentle voice. At the end of our talk, he told me his fee for the consultation. I reached into my purse and took out my checkbook. I wrote the check using my own Social Security money. It was the most powerful I had felt in years. He explained something called an irrevocable trust, a way to protect my house and my savings, to make sure they were used only for my care. No one else could touch them. I see, I told him, my voice steadier than I expected. It seems my children have forgotten something important. My life is not an estate to be settled before I'm gone. He smiled a sad, knowing smile. He knew I was ready to fight for myself. The phone rang on Tuesday afternoon. It was Susan. The sound of a game show blared from my television in the living room. "Mum, just reminding you about your doctor's appointment on Friday?" she said, her voice overly bright. "Mark and I were thinking we should both go this time, to make sure we ask all the right questions." I took a slow breath. I looked at the little ceramic bird on my windowsill, a gift from my husband. "Thank you for the thought, dear," I said, my voice calm and even. "But I've asked my friend Carol to take me. We're going for lunch after." The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the confusion, the frustration. Finally, she just sputtered, "Oh, well, fine." When I hung up the phone, I was smiling. It was a small victory, but it was mine. Sarah, my new patient advocate, arranged an appointment with a specialist an hour away. She told me to bring a notebook. The new doctor's office didn't smell like stale coffee and hurry. It smelled of lemon polish. He was a kind man with grey hair and gentle hands. He looked at my scans, then looked right at me. "Eleanor," he said, his voice soft. "This is not just arthritis. This is severe, degenerative osteoporosis. It's painful, but it is treatable." He explained the infusion therapy, the costs, the benefits. He drew a little diagram of a bone on his notepad. For the first time, I felt like a person, not a problem. He asked me how I had managed the pain for so long with just cheap painkillers. I looked at my own hands, resting on my purse. "My children handle my care. They told me it was the doctor's best advice." A wave of shame washed over me, hot and prickly. Then it was gone, replaced by something cold and clear. I met his eyes. "I've learned something through all this," I said. "My health is not your inheritance." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Real hope, warm as the afternoon sun. Mr. Davies, the lawyer Sarah recommended, was all business. He wore a crisp suit and had a no-nonsense air that I found comforting. He drafted the documents quickly. An irrevocable trust for my house and savings, a new will, and a short, sharp letter revoking the durable power of attorney I had given to Mark. "Once you sign these, Eleanor," he said, tapping the thick stack of papers on his desk, "your assets are protected. They are to be used for your care and your maintenance, as directed by a neutral trustee. Your children will have no access and no control." I took the copies home to read. I sat at my kitchen table, the one my late husband and I had bought 40 years ago. The smell of coffee was in the air. The papers felt heavy in my hands, heavier than a deed or a checkbook. They felt like the weight of my own future. As I read the line about revoking Mark's authority, I heard the crunch of tires on my gravel driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. It was Mark's blue sedan, pulling right up to the back door. My hands shook as I shoved the legal papers under the floral cushion on my kitchen chair. I grabbed a magazine and pretended to be reading when Mark walked in without knocking. The air conditioner hummed loudly in the sudden silence. "Just checking on you, Mum," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. He opened my refrigerator and peered inside. "You need anything from the store?" "No, dear. I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He closed the fridge and leaned against the counter. "Listen, I was thinking, the property tax bill is coming up. If you let me see your latest bank statements, I can help you budget for it. Make things simpler." I felt the stiff corner of the documents pressing into my leg through the cushion. He wanted to see my money. He wanted to see how much was left. "That's kind of you, Mark, but I have it handled." He frowned, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Don't be difficult, Mom. I'm just trying to help." He stayed a few more minutes, but the warmth was gone. He left suspicious, I could tell. But he left empty-handed. The next morning, I drove myself to Mr. Davies's office. I didn't call Carol to take me. I needed to do this alone. The office was quiet, just the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. I sat across the big mahogany desk from Mr. Davies, and he laid the papers out one by one. He pointed to each signature line. I picked up the heavy black pen. My hand was perfectly steady. I signed my name, Eleanor Vance, over and over again. The scratch of the pen on the thick paper was the only sound. With the last signature, it was done. The trust was real. The power of attorney was gone. My house, my savings, my life, they were mine again. A quiet, steely feeling settled deep in my bones. I drove home with the windows down, feeling the breeze on my face. The deed was done. Carol drove me to the clinic for my first infusion. She brought her knitting and a thermos of tea. The nurse was kind, her touch gentle as she put the IV in my arm. I watched the clear liquid in the bag, a slow drip, drip, drip into the tube. It felt like life itself, seeping back into me. "How do you feel, hun?" Carol asked, not looking up from her needles. "I feel—" I paused, searching for the word. "I feel like I'm finally watering my own garden." She smiled. While the medicine flowed into my arm, I took out the notebook I had brought to the specialist. On a fresh, clean page, I started a list. Things I will do when I feel stronger. The first thing I wrote was, plant a new rose bush. The old one by the porch had withered from neglect. I called them on a Thursday. I told them I wanted to have a family meeting that Sunday after church. "It's about future planning," I said. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Mark's voice came back, smooth as oil. "Of course, Mom. We'll be there." I hung up the phone, and the silence in my house felt different. It wasn't lonely. It was calm. They arrived right on time, their car pulling into my driveway just as the church bells finished ringing noon. They came in smiling, Susan carrying a cheap bouquet of carnations from the grocery store. They thought they knew what future planning meant. It meant I was finally giving in, handing over the last bits of control. As they sat down at my dining room table, the one my late husband, George, had built, I saw Mark catch Susan's eye. They exchanged a tiny, greedy smile, a look that said, "It's finally happening." They had no idea. I served the lemon cake, George's favorite. The scent of citrus and butter filled the room. I poured coffee into my good china cups, the ones with the little blue flowers. I let them talk. Susan went on about a cruise she wanted to take. Mark complained about a contractor for his kitchen renovation. They spoke as if my house were just a quiet room for their own plans to echo in. I listened, nodding politely. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked away the seconds. When they had both taken a second slice of cake, I went to the sideboard. I picked up 2 crisp, white envelopes. I walked back to the table and placed one in front of Mark and one in front of Susan. "I've made some changes to my arrangements," I said. My voice didn't shake. It was as steady as the old oak tree outside my window. Mark, always impatient, tore his envelope open with his thumb. The sound of ripping paper was loud in the quiet room. I watched his face. I saw the confident smirk falter, then slide away completely. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin looking papery and grey. Susan opened hers more carefully. Her brow furrowed in confusion, then her eyes widened. Her hand flew to her mouth, a little gasp escaping her lips. She looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper, as if she couldn't believe what the words were telling her. "An irrevocable trust? You put the house in a trust?" Mark's voice was a shout. He shoved his chair back, the legs screeching against the wood floor, and jumped to his feet. The coffee in his cup sloshed over the saucer. Susan was still staring at the letter from my lawyer, her face pale with shock. "You revoked our power of attorney?" she whispered. The words were so quiet I could barely hear them over the ringing in my own ears. I didn't answer. I just picked up my teacup, the porcelain warm against my fingers, and took a slow, deliberate sip. "How could you do this to us?" Susan finally wailed, the tears starting to stream down her face. "After everything we've done for you." Everything they'd done. The generic pills, the cancelled appointments, the whispers about assets. I set my cup down gently, making a soft clink against the saucer. I looked my son in the eye, then my daughter. "I discovered the truth about my diagnosis," I said, my voice clear and cold as ice. "My health is not your inheritance." Mark's face twisted into a snarl. "We'll fight this," he hissed, pointing a finger at me. "You're not competent to make these decisions." Mark's face was blotchy and red. The veins stood out on his neck. "We'll fight this," he snarled. "You're not competent to make these decisions." I took another small sip of my tea. The porcelain was cool against my lips. "Actually, I am," I said, my voice as steady as a rock. "I have a letter from my new specialist, Dr. Evans, confirming my full mental competence. He wrote it just last week." I placed the teacup back on its saucer with a gentle click. The sound was very loud in the tense room. "My lawyer, Mr. Davies, is expecting your call. I believe he has a copy of that letter as well. Now, this meeting is over." Susan just stared, her mouth hanging open like a fish. Mark grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. He didn't say goodbye. The front door slammed behind them, and the little glass panes rattled in their frames. The silence they left behind was the most profound and peaceful sound I had heard in years. My phone started buzzing on the end table almost immediately. It was a text from Mark, then another from Susan. Then the phone began to ring. I looked at their names on the screen, feeling nothing but a distant sort of tiredness. I didn't read the messages. I didn't listen to the voicemails they left. With a steady hand, I found Mark's name in my contacts. I scrolled down and pressed the button that said, "Block this caller." A little pop-up asked if I was sure. I was. I did the same for Susan. The phone fell silent. The house was quiet again. I picked up the phone one last time and dialed Carol. Are you busy? I asked. Never for you, Eleanor, she said. What's on your mind? The weather is lovely, I said, looking out the window at the crisp autumn sunshine. I was wondering if you'd like to go for a walk. A real walk. We walked to the end of my street and back. The air smelled of wood smoke and dry leaves. For the first time in over a year, every step I took didn't send a jolt of fire through my hip. I wasn't just walking. I was strolling. The phone calls started a few days later. Not from my children, but about them. My sister, Jean, was the first. Eleanor? It's me, she said, her voice tight with worry. I just got off the phone with Susan. She was crying her eyes out. She said you're not well, that someone is influencing you to sign away your house. I sat down in my new armchair, the one I'd bought with the garage sale money. I felt the soft fabric under my fingertips. John, what did I always tell you about Susan's tears? There was a pause. That they start when she doesn't get her way, Jean admitted quietly. They were willing to let my health decline to inherit my house, I said, simply and without anger. They ignored my pain and lied about my diagnosis. I took steps to protect myself. You can believe who you wish. The silence on the line stretched on. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in her hallway, 3 states away. Finally, Jean took a deep breath. That sounds exactly like them, she said. The following Sunday, I saw their car in the church parking lot. My heart gave a little flutter of nerves, but I smoothed down my dress and walked inside. Carol was waiting for me in our usual pew. The organ was playing a soft prelude, and the church smelled of old wood and candle wax. Just before the service started, Mark and Susan came marching down the aisle. They stopped right at my pew. "Mum, we need to talk to you," Susan said, her voice loud enough for the whole section to hear. Heads turned. Before I could answer, Carol stood up on one side of me. Mrs. Gable from the Altar Guild stood up on the other. 2 rows ahead, Mr. Henderson turned around, and he did not look pleased. A little circle formed around me without a single word being spoken. Mark's face turned a dark shade of red. He opened his mouth, but our pastor, Reverend Michael, appeared as if from nowhere. He put a gentle but firm hand on Mark's shoulder. "Mark, Susan," he said, his voice low but clear. "This is neither the time nor the place. Perhaps it would be best if you left." The public humiliation was theirs, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. On Tuesday morning, I had a meeting with Mr. Riley, the man from the bank who was now my trustee. He was a kind, professional man with a neat grey suit and a reassuring smile. We sat in a quiet office that smelled faintly of coffee and paper. "Everything is in order, Eleanor," he said, showing me a binder with neatly organised tabs. "The quarterly property taxes have been paid. I've scheduled the automatic payments for your utilities. And this is the check for the co-payment on your next infusion." He spoke to me like I was a client, like my thoughts mattered. There was no sighing, no talk of how much things cost, no mention of my house as an asset. For the first time, I felt the heavy blanket of financial pressure lift completely. The daily weight that had been suffocating me for so long was finally gone. A thick, cream-coloured envelope arrived a few days later. It had the name of a fancy law firm embossed in the corner. I didn't even have to open it to feel the anger sealed inside. My hand trembled just a little as I picked it up. I put it right back down on the hall table, next to my car keys. I didn't need that kind of trouble in my morning. Instead, I put it inside a larger manila envelope and drove it to the post office. I mailed it, unopened, straight to Mr. Davies. He called that afternoon, just as I was taking a chicken casserole out of the oven. The smell of thyme and roasted garlic filled my kitchen. "Eleanor, I received your package," he said. His voice was as calm as a still pond. "It's exactly what we expected. A lot of noise and bluster." "Do I need to worry?" I asked, wiping my hands on my apron. "Not for a second," he said. "Don't you give this another thought. They have no case, and they know it. This is just to scare you." I hung up the phone, and for the first time, I realized I hadn't been scared at all. I had just been annoyed. A week after the lawyer's letter, a different kind of envelope appeared in my mailbox. This one was thin, pale pink, and addressed in Susan's loopy, dramatic handwriting. I could see a dark, circular stain where a tear had likely fallen. I took it inside and sat at my kitchen table, the plastic of the tablecloth cool against my arms. The letter was full of blame for Mark, saying he had pushed her into everything. It was full of apologies that didn't feel real. Then I got to the last paragraph. After all the tears and regret, she asked if, once I was feeling better, we could maybe look into dissolving the trust. "For tax reasons," she wrote. "It would be so much simpler for everyone." I read that line twice. Simpler for who? I picked up the letter, walked over to the little shredder I kept by my desk, and fed the pink paper into the slot. The machine whirred to life, a low, satisfying growl that chewed her words into meaningless confetti. It was a sound I was coming to love. The next morning, I called a handyman my friend Carol recommended. A nice young man named Ben came over. He fixed the loose step on the back porch, the one Mark had promised to fix for 3 years. The solid thud of my foot on the secure wood was a small miracle. Then, feeling bold, I asked him for a quote to paint the living room. "What colour are you thinking?" he asked, pulling out a little book of paint chips. I pointed to a bright, cheerful yellow, the colour of daffodils in spring. Susan had always called that colour gaudy. "That one," I said. 2 days later, my living room was filled with the clean smell of new paint and sunlight. It felt like my house was finally taking a deep breath, right along with me. With my hip feeling stronger from the treatments, I did something I hadn't done in years. I joined the senior water aerobics class at the community centre. The first time I went, I was nervous. But the warm water felt like a hug, taking all the weight off my joints. The instructor played old songs from the 70s, and soon I was splashing along with everyone else. I made a new friend, a woman named Shirley, who had a laugh that could shake the windows. We started going for coffee after class. One day, she told a joke so silly I found myself laughing from my belly, a deep, rumbling laugh that I hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. "There you are," Shirley said, smiling at me over her cup. I was waiting to hear that. It felt better than any medicine. The little light on my computer blinked one evening. It was an email. I had to put on my reading glasses to see the sender's name. Amy, my oldest grandchild. My heart did a little flip-flop. I clicked it open, my finger hovering over the mouse. The message was short. "Grandma, Mom told me some things. I just wanted to say I'm so sorry. I had no idea what was going on. I love you." I wrote back immediately. "I love you too, sweet girl. How about you come for lunch on Saturday? Just us." She came over that weekend. We didn't talk much about her parents. We talked about her classes at the community college, about the boys she liked. After we ate, we stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the backyard. "I remember you used to have a beautiful rose bush right there," she said, pointing to a sad, empty patch of dirt. The old one had died from neglect a few years back. "It did," I said. Amy looked at me, her eyes clear and kind. "Can I help you plant a new one?" I had my first quarterly review with my trustee in his downtown office. It was on the 10th floor, and I could see the whole town square from his window. The room smelled like clean paper and faint coffee. He wasn't a young man, but he wasn't old either. He had a calm voice and looked me in the eye when he spoke. He slid a folder across the polished wood table. "Eleanor, the trust is performing well," he said. "All your medical bills are paid, the property taxes are handled, and we have a healthy budget for home maintenance." I looked at the neat columns of numbers. Everything was clear. There was a line item for groceries, for the pharmacy, for the handyman I'd hired. It felt strange and wonderful to be treated like a client, like a person whose needs were the top priority. "Is there anything else you need that we haven't accounted for?" he asked, his pen ready. "Any trips you'd like to plan? Hobbies?" I thought for a moment, the hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. A trip. The idea felt like a window opening in a stuffy room. "Maybe just a small one," I said, a smile starting on my lips, "to see the autumn leaves." Carol and I took a bus tour to Vermont. The big windows of the bus were like movie screens, showing miles of rolling hills painted in impossible shades of red and gold. The air smelled crisp and clean every time we stopped. We stayed in little country inns and ate pancakes with real maple syrup. One afternoon, sitting in a cozy coffee shop, I bought a handful of postcards. One showed a bright red covered bridge. I sent it to my sister. I sent another one to my friends from water aerobics. I wrote about the beautiful scenery and the terrible jokes the bus driver told. "Aren't you sending one to Mark and Susan?" Carol asked gently, stirring her tea. I picked up my pen and looked at the last blank postcard. "No," I said, and the word felt simple and light. "I don't think they'd be interested." I slid the postcard back into my purse. It felt good to know my new address wasn't their business anymore. A few weeks later, after the Sunday service, I was in the church basement, helping clear away the potluck dishes. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and leftover casserole. Brenda, who always knew everything, came over to me with a stack of paper plates. "Eleanor, did you hear about Mark's business?" she said, her voice low. "Such a shame. I heard he had to lay off 2 people." I kept wiping the counter, my hand moving in slow circles. "Oh?" I said, keeping my voice even. "Yes," she went on, leaning closer. "Frank said he heard Mark was counting on some money well, that it didn't come through." I felt a distant, sad ache in my chest. Not guilt. Just a heavy sort of pity. His choices were his own. I remembered his voice in my hallway, so sure of himself. "The house is the main asset." I looked up and saw Brenda watching me, her eyes full of curiosity. I wondered what story she had heard. The public library was my new favorite place. Twice a week, I volunteered to read to the preschoolers. The children's section smelled of old books and crayons. I'd sit in a low, brightly colored chair, and all these little faces would look up at me, their eyes wide. I read them stories about brave mice and grumpy bears. I made my voice high for the princess and low and rumbly for the dragon. They would giggle and squirm. Sometimes, a little one would climb into my lap, their small head resting against my arm, their hair smelling of bubblegum shampoo. "Grandma Eleanor, do it again!" A little boy named Sam shouted after I made a loud, roaring sound. Afterward, the librarian thanked me. "They adore you, Eleanor. You have a real gift." Walking home that afternoon, the crisp air felt good in my lungs. I felt useful. I wasn't just a patient or a problem or an asset. To them, I was just Grandma Eleanor, the lady who knew what a dragon sounded like. I wondered what I would read to them next week. The specialist's office was always so calm. No one ever seemed rushed. The doctor came in with a warm smile and pulled up my chart on his computer. He looked at the screen, then at me. "The results from your latest scan are excellent, Eleanor," he said. "The infusions are working wonderfully. Your bone density has improved significantly." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The paper on the exam table crinkled under my hands. For so long, every doctor's visit had been filled with a quiet dread. This felt like sunshine. "You've given yourself a new lease on life," he said, and his words settled deep inside me. He was right. I had done this. He closed my file and leaned forward slightly, his expression turning thoughtful. "Eleanor," he said, "I have another patient. A woman in a situation a bit like yours. Her family is making decisions for her. Would you ever consider speaking with her?" The doctor called me a few weeks later. She had another patient, a woman named Margaret, who was having trouble with her family over a new diagnosis. "I told her a little about you," the doctor said. "Would you be willing to talk with her?" We met for coffee at the little bakery downtown. The air smelled of sugar and yeast. Margaret was a small woman with worried eyes, and she twisted a paper napkin in her hands until it shredded. She told me her son kept telling her she was overreacting and that a cheaper medication was practically the same thing. I listened, nodding. I didn't give advice. I just told her what I had done. "First, I got a copy of my full medical records," I said, my voice low and steady. "It's your right." I wrote down the names of Sarah, my patient advocate, and Mr. Davies on a clean napkin and pushed it across the table. Her hand trembled as she took it. She looked at me, a tiny spark of hope in her eyes. "You can do this," I told her. It felt good to pass the key to someone else. The next Saturday, I held a massive garage sale. Carol came over early to help me haul boxes out of the attic and basement. For years, my house had been a free storage unit for Mark and Susan. His old exercise equipment, her college textbooks, boxes of baby clothes they swore they'd come get one day. The sun was warm on my back as we arranged everything on folding tables. Neighbours came by, picking through the junk of my children's past lives. I sold an old Nordic track for $20 and a set of chipped dishes for $5. The cash box grew heavier with every sale. It wasn't about the money. It was about the space. By late afternoon, everything was gone. The basement echoed. The attic felt huge. The next day, I took the cash I'd made and went to the furniture store. I bought a brand new armchair, a soft grey one with a matching ottoman. The delivery men placed it right by the window. I sat down, leaned my head back, and felt nothing but my own quiet comfort. For my 71st birthday, I decided to have a small party in the garden. I didn't want a big fuss, just the people who mattered. Carol came, of course, and my sister drove down. My friends from the water aerobics class brought a ridiculous floating flamingo for the bird bath. And Amy, my granddaughter, came with a lemon cake, my husband's favourite. We sat on lawn chairs as the sun went down, the air cooling and smelling of cut grass and the roses Amy had helped me plant. There were no tense conversations, no one checking their watch. We just talked and laughed. Amy put her hand on my arm. "You seem so happy, Grandma," she said. I looked around at the faces lit by the string of patio lights I'd hung. They were my family now. My real family. I felt a sense of peace so deep it was almost startling. This was what it was supposed to feel like. I ran into Susan at the grocery store a week later. I was in the frozen food aisle, trying to decide between peas and corn, when I saw her at the other end. The bright fluorescent lights seemed to wash all the colour from her face. She looked tired, and there were lines around her mouth I'd never seen before. Our eyes met for just a second. I saw a flicker of something. Shame, maybe? Or just surprise. She quickly looked down at her shopping list, grabbed a bag of frozen shrimp, and hurried her cart around the corner without a word. The squeak of her cart's wobbly wheel echoed as she disappeared. I stood there for a moment, the cold from the freezer door seeping into my fingers. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a quiet sort of finality, like watching the last leaf fall from a tree in autumn. I made an appointment with Mr. Davies to update my will. His office still smelled of leather and old books, a scent I now found comforting. We sat at his big mahogany desk, the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock filling the silence. "I've made some decisions," I told him, my voice clear. I wanted to set up small educational trusts for each of my grandchildren, to be managed by the bank. They would get the money for college or trade school, but not before. Amy would get my wedding ring. "And the remainder of the estate?" Mr. Davies asked, his pen poised over the paper. "The house? The accounts?" I took a deep breath. "Split it," I said. 50% to the hospital that gave me my life back, and 50% to the public library where I learned to be strong again. He looked at me over his glasses, and a slow, respectful smile spread across his face. He made the notes without another question. I named the old cat Patches. He was a long-haired tabby with one ragged ear and the slowest, most dignified walk I had ever seen. The girl at the shelter had tried to show me the kittens, their tiny paws batting at the cage door. "Oh, they're lovely," I'd said. "But I think that fellow in the corner and I are on the same schedule." He had been curled in a tight ball on a grey blanket, ignoring all the noise. When I got him home, he explored every room with a quiet seriousness. Then he hopped onto my lap, circled 3 times, and started a purr that sounded like a tiny, rumbling motor. The house, which had felt clean and empty, now felt full. It was nice to have another heartbeat in the room, one that didn't want anything but a warm place to sleep and a bit of food in a bowl. It was the first time in a long time I felt like I was the one taking care of someone else. One rainy Tuesday, I decided to finally tackle the linen closet. It smelled of old cedar and forgotten things. Behind a stack of yellowed towels was a shoebox full of old photographs. I sat on the floor, the scent of dust in the air, and pulled one out. It was Mark and Susan, maybe 5 and 7 years old, on the swing set my husband, Frank, built. Their faces were bright with laughter, their hair flying. Frank's strong hands were on the small of Susan's back, pushing her higher. A single tear traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't for the people they had become. It was for these 2 little children, and for the woman who believed their love was unconditional. I allowed myself that one moment of grief. Then I wiped my face, put the lid back on the box, and placed it on the highest shelf. It was a part of my history, but it didn't have to be a part of my everyday. The closet door clicked shut, and I felt a little lighter. The community room at the library was buzzing. Carol and my friends from water aerobics had saved me a seat right in the front row. The director, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, stood at a small podium next to a tray of cookies. The air smelled of coffee and old paper. "And our Volunteer of the Year award," she announced, her voice warm, "goes to a woman who brings so much joy to our littlest readers, Eleanor Vance." My friends clapped so loudly. I felt a blush creep up my neck as I walked up to accept the small wooden plaque. "You are a treasure, Eleanor," Mrs. Gable whispered, giving me a hug. I held the plaque in my hands. It felt solid and real. This wasn't for a casserole I'd made or a bill I'd paid. This was for me. just me. As I sat down, Carol leaned over. See, I told you. You're a local celebrity now. I laughed, a real deep laugh that came from my toes. That evening, I was in my new armchair with Patches purring on my lap. The phone rang, and the screen just said, blocked number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. Hello? There was a pause. Mum? It's me. It was Mark. His voice was thin, stripped of all its usual confidence. Mark, I said, my voice perfectly even. He started talking, a rush of words about bad investments, a failed business, about losing everything. I'm so sorry, Mum, he said, and for a moment, he sounded like a little boy again. For everything. I don't know who else to turn to. I need help, just a loan to get back on my feet. I listened to the whole story without saying a word. I felt a distant, sad pity for the man he had become. When he was finished, the line was quiet, except for his shaky breathing. I can't help you, Mark, I said, my voice soft but firm. My funds are for my care. I wish you well. I pressed the red button on the screen before he could reply. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady, comforting rumble of Patches's purr. The sun was warm on my back. Amy arrived with a small rose bush in a plastic pot, its leaves a healthy, glossy green. We worked together in the garden, digging a hole where the old, neglected bush used to be. The smell of fresh earth was wonderful. This one is called a peace rose, Grandma, Amy said, gently tamping the soil around the roots. I thought it seemed right. It's perfect, dear, I said, smiling. After we watered it in, we sat on the porch swing with tall glasses of iced tea. We talked about her classes, about a boy she liked, about her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. It was all so normal, so easy. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn. Amy leaned her head on my shoulder for a moment. It feels so nice here, Grandma, she said softly. So happy. I looked out at my little yard, at the new rose bush standing proudly in the sunlight, and I realized she was right. It was. The house was finally happy again. We spent the afternoon in the garden, my granddaughter Amy and I. The sun was warm on my back, and the soil felt cool and rich in my hands. We were planting a new rose bush, a deep crimson one, right where the old one had withered from neglect. Amy's hands, so young and steady, worked beside mine. This one is called Lasting Peace, she said, reading the little plastic tag. Seems about right, doesn't it, Grandma? I smiled, patting the earth down around the base of the plant. It does, dear. It certainly does. We didn't talk about her parents. We didn't need to. We talked about her classes at the community college and the silly dog she wanted to adopt. As we were washing our hands at the kitchen sink, the water running over the dirt under our fingernails, she looked at me. You know, she said quietly, Mom and Dad sold their big house. They're renting a little place over by the highway now. I just nodded, drying my hands on a dish towel. Is that so? I felt nothing. Not joy, not sadness. It was just a piece of information, like hearing about the weather in a distant city. A few weeks later, I got a call. It was Sarah, the patient advocate. She sounded pleased and professional, as always. Eleanor, I have a new client I'd like you to meet, if you're willing. Her situation. It sounds a lot like yours did. We met at the same coffee shop where Sarah and I first sat down. The woman, named Margaret, looked like a frightened bird. Her hands trembled as she held her coffee cup, the ceramic clinking against the saucer. She told me her story in a whisper, Her son was in charge of her bills, and her doctor kept telling her the pain was just old age. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Her trembling stopped. "Margaret," I said, my voice calm and clear, "the first thing you need to know is that your health is not an inconvenience. It's your life." She looked up at me, her eyes filling with tears. "They make me feel so expensive." "I know that feeling," I said, "and I know the way out." I gave her Mr. Davies's phone number. As I walked away, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a lighthouse. On a whim, I signed up for a pottery class at the senior centre. The feeling of the cool, wet clay spinning under my hands was wonderful. It was messy and real. A woman named Judy sat at the wheel next to me. Her pot was lopsided and beautiful. "My first one looked like a collapsed lung," she said, with a loud laugh. "We hit it off right away." "My children always said I wasn't the creative type," I told her, as I tried to center a lump of clay. Judy snorted. "What do children know? Mine thought my social security check was their personal ATM." We laughed until we had to wipe tears and clay from our faces. That day, I brought home a small, wobbly bowl. It was the most beautiful thing I owned. My sister called on a Tuesday morning. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. My cat, Pearl, was sleeping in a patch of sun on the rug. "You're not going to believe this, Eleanor," my sister said. "Susan called me, crying." "Oh?" I said, looking out the window at a blue jay on the fence. "Mark declared bankruptcy. The business is gone. Apparently he was using the house, your house, as collateral on his business plan. He told the bank he'd have the asset free and clear within the year." She paused. "Susan wanted to know if you might reconsider the trust. For them." I thought about it for a moment. I thought about the cheap painkillers and the word asset whispered in my hallway. I thought about the fear and the pain. "No," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "I don't think I will." This morning I woke before the sun. I made a cup of tea and carried it out to the back porch. Pearl, my little grey cat, followed me and curled up on the cushion of the wicker chair beside me. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and the night's rain. The new rosebush Amy and I had planted was covered in tiny, perfect buds, dark as velvet. In the quiet grey light, I saw the first one had just started to open, a single crimson petal unfurled, holding a drop of dew like a tiny jewel. I took a sip of my tea. The warmth spread through my chest. There were no angry phone calls to dread, no appointments to fight for, no feeling of being a line item in someone else's budget. There was just the quiet house, the loyal cat, and the promise of a flower. My life wasn't a grand inheritance for someone else to spend. It was this quiet moment, and it was all mine.